Okay, we've made it to what should be the last video of our series. We've got our renders, and they're looking pretty good. Now what I want to do is a little bit of post-processing to kind of give them that last little bit of polish. And there's a couple ways we can do this. We can do this in Photoshop, and we can do this in Blender. Now, I'm going to be focusing on Blender, but everything that we do in Blender, we can also do in Photoshop with just a few simple layers of gradient overlays and things like that. So really choose whatever one you're more comfortable with. I'm going for something that looks kind of like this, but like I said, we're going to do this in Blender. So I'm going to open up a brand new Blender scene. Because we're just going to be working with those rendered images, I don't need my full Cyberpunk street scene loaded up. And I'm going to go over to the compositing workspace, and I'm just going to collapse the timeline down there. I don't need to worry about that. Okay, so we need to first check Use Nodes. This is a node-based workflow. And by default, we have render layers and our composite output. So this works, the nodes work in a very similar way to the shader editor. The nodes themselves are a little bit differently, or are a little bit different, but they behave the same way. So if I hit Shift A, we can see that we've got input nodes, we have output nodes, some color nodes, and some of them are the same, like brightness, contrast, but some of them are different. So we've got a filter category that has some blurs, some glare. We've got a matte category, which we'll make pretty good use of, all sorts of things. Now, the way that this works is we start with an input, and by default, it's a render layer. So this can actually take the direct render output from your scene and make that the composite. So if I jump back to the layout, and you can see this is our view. If I hit F12 to render it, this is what it looks like. Super simple and basic. Once I render that, okay, render finished, good. Now we can go over to our compositing workspace, and you should be able to see, I think we need to set our viewer. So I'm going to hit Shift A, add in a output viewer. There we go. Okay. And I'm going to connect the image to the viewer node. So the viewer node is what we need to kind of work. Composite is like the final render. The viewer node is the one that I want. And you can see it pops up in the background. So if we go to the view menu, we have, actually, before we get there, the top right here, we have this backdrop option. So that will show us the results of all of our work in the background of the compositor. Now we can have this set up to display everything. We can have it set up to, let's see, so this is color and alpha, I believe. Yes, color and alpha. This is just color. This is just alpha. And then we can also look at just red, green, or blue channels. They all look the same because it's a gray image right now. I'm going to leave this on the first one, color and alpha. Make sure we have backdrop on. And then if we go to the view channel, or view menu, we can move the backdrop around with Alt middle mouse button. We can also zoom in and out with V and Alt V, and Alt Home to fit to available space. But V, Alt V, and Alt middle mouse are the ones we're concerned about. So Alt middle mouse, we can move this around. So I'm just going to kind of tuck it down bottom here. I'm also going to, I don't know if I can turn on Screencast Keys here. All right, so here's what I'll do, if it helps. Oops, don't want to do that. I'm going to split my view a little bit. This is bottom view, I'll set to the 3D viewport. Hit N. And go to Screencast Keys, and I'll turn those on. Okay, so you'll see my Screencast Keys pop up down here, just so you can see what I'm hitting. Okay. I do have Node Wrangler on. Again, that's the add-on in here, Node Wrangler. It just helps speed up the workflow a little bit. Okay, so here's the basic output. And again, V will zoom out, and Alt V will zoom in. That's a shortcut that I always forget, because I don't do a whole lot of compositing in Blender very often, but it's there in the view menu if you forget. Okay, and so the way that this works is if I add in, let's do something really obvious like a color correction. No, not that one. We'll do color balance. Oops. Color balance. Okay. So I drop this on top of the connection to the viewer node. Now what I can do is, let's say I want the shadows to be kind of red. Or actually, no, we'll go with like blue shadows, and we'll make the highlights kind of orangey. A little bit brighter, a little bit more orangey. Something like that. Okay, you can see we're getting that immediate feedback in the viewer. And then we can also, once we're ready and happy with all of this, if we go to our render options, I believe it's an output. In our output properties at the bottom, we've got post-processing. We can turn off sequencer, but we turn on compositing. And then when we hit render, it's going to, in this case, it's going to render the whole scene because we're using the render layers. But once it finishes that, then it's going to apply our compositor. Okay, and we'll get those effects. So what we can do is, instead of using a render layer, we can just use an image. So I'm going to hit X to delete that. And then I'm just going to drag in our wide render. So it's going to be this one right here. So you can drag it in. See, it pops up right there. I'm going to connect the image to my color balance. It's going to pop right in there in the back. Now, this color balance is, if I hit M to mute it, you can see it's doing quite a bit. But let's just pretend, for now, that that's what we want. Well, then what I can do is, again, hit F12 to render, and there it goes. Okay, so that's the super short workflow. From here, you can just kind of tinker and play around and figure it out. But there's a whole lot more to cover, and I'm going to cover some of it to get to what I think looks like a more polished image. Again, these are all kind of aesthetic choices, but let's get into it. So let's delete this color balance node with Control X to keep the connections, and kind of figure out the parts that we want to approach. So we need a background because we rendered on a transparent, or we rendered with transparency. So we need to add a background. I usually like to add a subtle vignette to just about everything, whether that be 3D renders or if I'm shooting commercials or films or anything like that. Everything gets at least a subtle vignette. And then we can do some color work to kind of change some of the tonality around. I mean, you saw what I did in Photoshop. Like this is the after that I'm more or less shooting for. Okay, so let's start with the background. For the background, I'm going to add in a matte, and I'm going to use an ellipse mask. Okay. So I'm just going to pop that over here, and I'm going to Control-Shift-click on it so I can see it in the viewer directly. Okay, this is what, again, having Node Wrangler on does, is it allows us to do this sort of thing very quickly. So let's zoom in on the ellipse mask here. You'll also notice as I zoom in the compositor, the background image does not zoom. Okay, that's an independent zoom, and that's why you need V or Alt V to zoom in. All right, so let me Alt middle click and drag just to make sure I'm seeing the whole image. And let's set the width of this to 1, and the height of this, I'll just drag it until it just about covers it. Okay, that's good. Now we can also adjust the position with the X and Y, so if I wanted to shift it over, I could do that. But I'm going to leave that at 0.5, so it's halfway, right in the center. We can rotate it if we want. Again, I don't want to, but we can. Mask type, we can add, multiply, subtract, or not. And then we have mask, which honestly I don't know what this... Can't remember what this does. Oh, that's right. Kind of caps the ends, but we're going to leave that at 0 and 1. We really only need to worry about the width and the height and the position. So we've got that. And now what I want to do is I want to blur the edges. So I'm going to hit Shift-A, add in a filter, and we'll add blur. And we can choose different types of blur. Gaussian is fine. And just we need to set the amount. So let's go 500 and 500. Okay, so there's our blur. And then as we're looking at this, I want to see, well, okay, I'm going to leave it like this for now. Because the next thing I want to do is I want to color the background. I don't want this to actually be the background. All right, and let's actually set up that background now. If I add in a, I want to do color and mix RGB, just a mix node. I'm going to drop that on the street image, and then I'm going to bring my background into the second input, and then Control-Shift-Click on the mix. Okay, so there's the mix. Obviously, we don't want that. If we go all the way to 1, or all the way to 0, it's going to be the first input. All the way to 1, it's going to be the second input. But if we just set, I believe it's add. No, sorry, that's not right at all. What we actually want, whoops, let me get rid of that. We don't want an add node. I was thinking about Photoshop terms. No, we want an alpha over. Okay, so with Shift S, change that to alpha over, and here's what we get. So we're putting. We want to make sure we have the image in the second slot, but we're just layering them on top, and it's using the alpha channel as the factor. Okay. And so that's looking pretty good. But like I said, we want to change the color background because this looks awful to me. So I'm going to hit Shift A, and I'm going to add in a color, actually, no, it's a converter color ramp. And I'm going to drop that between the blur and my alpha overlay, or alpha over node. I'm also going to Control-Shift-Click on the color ramp, so we're only looking at that gradient. I'm also going to collapse these nodes and just push them out of the way for a little bit. I'm going to try to work as cleanly as possible. Node trees can get kind of complicated and disorienting. So we've got our color ramp. Now we can move these handles in. Okay, so if we want something a little bit more extreme, we can do that. Okay, but we can also change the color. So I'm going to change the black. Actually, I'm going to leave the black alone, but I'm going to go to the white, and I want to change that to like a teal color. But then I want to make it really dark and a little bit desaturated. Okay, so something maybe something like that, I think would be a good starting point. So there, and then we can Control-Shift-Click back on our alpha over and see that overlaid. Okay. So there is the after. If I hover over this node and M to mute it. Okay, so it's definitely darker. Now it's still too bright, and that's because the gradient is just too extreme. So let me go back to my mask here. And I want to change this scale from 1 to 0.5. I'm going to bring this down to, let's go in half and see what that looks like. Roughly in half. That's going to be a little bit too far. Okay, I think something like that might work. Okay, the blur is still fine. Don't need to worry about that. And let's see what that looks like here. Okay, I'm just going to jump over to Photoshop just to compare, because I have this background color. I've got my gradient. I just want to compare my gradients. See what this color is. I'm just going to copy this color so you can see it is a dark desaturated teal, but I want to grab that exact color because I liked how that turned out. I'll jump back into Blender. Okay, so let me go over here and change this color. I can actually enter in the hex values. So I'm going to Control V to paste that. Okay, go. Yeah, and then let's kind of bring those around. Okay, I think that's going to work. I I'm not loving the alpha over. I kind of want a little bit more. I want to see the background a little bit more. I think that the fog might be a little too intense. But I think let's come back to that. Let's do a little. Let's add a gradient over the top of everything first. Okay. So this is these are my background nodes. So in an effort to keep things organized, I'm going to do a couple things. First, I'm going to rename these nodes. So I'll select the first one, and then I've got my item options over here. So let's name this background mask. Oh, that didn't actually name it. It's the label. Background mask. Okay, so that's named. I'll grab the blur node. We'll call this background blur. I like to keep underscores in between them. Not necessary though. And this is going to be background color. Okay, so I've got all of those named. But I can select the three of these, I believe, and then I can group them. Control G. What that's going to do is it's actually going to create almost like a folder of nodes. Okay, you can see there's a group input and a group output. And if I hit tab, it will collapse them into a node group. And then I can name this group background, or BG. Okay. So there's my background node. And if I ever want to edit it, I just have to select the node, hit tab, and you can see I've got all of my nodes right there. Okay. So that will help with organization a bit. Okay, like I said, I want to do a color overlay next. So let's Shift A, and I'm going to add another matte, and this is going to be a box mask. Control Shift click on this so we can see it. And let's go, I'm going to go to 1 in the vertical. Let's rotate this a little bit. And I'm going to scale it out this way a little bit and then move it over. Whoops, hold down Shift and kind of move it over. Something like that. Okay, and let's also move it up a little bit. Maybe we'll rotate a little bit more. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to blur this. So filter, blur, put that right on there. And I think we'll do 500 again. It's a pretty good amount. And I'm also going to hit extend bounds. No, I guess we don't really need that. Okay, so we've got that. Let's push this over in the X direction a little bit more. There we go. Now, I'm going to add another color ramp. So converter, color ramp. And now we can set our colors for this. I'm going to go pretty bold with this. On this side, let's bring up the intensity here. I'm going to go with kind of a really bright pink. And actually, again, if I'm trying to perfectly replicate this, I believe that was in the blues. No, it was in pinks. I don't remember where that is. So this is what we're trying to replicate. So we can just kind of look at this. Go normal. Okay, so this is what I'm shooting for. It's a really bright pink over here. Maybe select that color. Grab our hex value. Then let's enter that in. Again, you can eyeball it. You don't have to be exact like I am. But I like these colors and I want to replicate them. Okay. And then the white here. Paste that in. All right. And then we need to swap the order here. Okay. So we're going in that direction. And in the center here, we had kind of a blue. So let me hit the plus. It's going to add another node. And it's kind of like a purplish blue, kind of like a lavender. So let's bring that in. Okay, so now we've got our nodes. You can see the gradient is a little bit abrupt there. So let's change this from linear to ease. Maybe B-spline? No, I think we will keep it at ease. And then we just need to feather this out a little bit more. So we can try. Oops, nope. Increasing that. But really what I think I'm going to do, and add in one more node here. I'm going to paste that same midtone. Oops. Grab this midtone. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to copy this hex value and go back over to this and paste that hex value. Okay. Yeah, I think we are just going to need to increase this. Let's go 1,000, 1,000. Let's move this back over. Wrong way. Go. Let's see, linear. Guess that's okay. All right, let's go with that. We can tweak that more later. All right, so once we have this, and I'm going to select these three nodes. Let's do a little bit of naming, and we'll call this gradient mask. This is going to be gradient blur, and this will be gradient color. Okay, we'll select those, all three of those, and right-click, and we can group these again. I just want to show another option that you have. We can hit Shift-A and add in a layout frame. Okay, and then we can grab our nodes and drag them into the frame. Then we can move them around as a group like this. Okay, and then this frame we can select and we can name it. Call it gradient overlay. Okay, so that's another way that you can organize your scene. Either one works. If you like to see all of your nodes active at the same time, you can do it that way. If you want to condense things, then you can use groups. I think for clarity, I'm going to ungroup these. And I'm going to just add another frame down here. So I'll select, can I select them and then do it? Let's see. I don't think so. I think we can just go layout, frame. There we go. And then we will grab our three nodes, drop them in that frame, grab the frame and name it background. Okay, so there's our background frame. Okay. Back to our gradient overlay. Now what we want to do with this gradient overlay is actually combine it with our image. So I'm going to do this after the background, so it's going to affect the render and the background that we made. Okay, so let me zoom out on the image a little bit, and Alt middle click and drag just to get that a little more out of the way. And I'm going to add in a shift color mix node. Drop that after our alpha over. We'll connect both of these up. Okay, and then we want to grab the output of our gradient color to our image. I'm going to set this to overlay. I'm going to bring the factor way down. Okay, you see if we're all the way at 100%, that's like super neon. Let me go down to somewhere 3.4, something like that. And that might even be, might be a bit much. Yeah, we definitely don't want to flip those. Just want to make sure that that's what I had in here. I believe it is. Yep, set to overlay. Okay. So now we get a little bit of that look. If we want to kind of see the before and after, we can hit M on this and mute it. So that's the after, or that's the before. And there's the after. Okay, I like that. Just feel like we're getting still a little bit too much brightness over here. But let's add in a little vignette next. So vignette is going to be, it's going to be another gradient. And it's just going to darken the edges and help bring the eye into the scene. So let's move these over here. We'll move this overlay over here. And I think the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to just I'll take my background mask and blur nodes. I'm going to duplicate them. So Shift D to duplicate. Move them up here. And then I'll just, it's going to let me take them out of the group. I know pretty sure there's a way to just take them out of the group. Maybe not. That's a thing I haven't run into. And it's going to bother me. And I don't want to take the time to look it up, even though I'm sure it's a quick answer. We'll just add them ourselves. So again, it's a matte and ellipse mask. Zoom in on this so we can see it. Control-Shift-click on it so we can see the results. I'm going to set the width to 1, the height to roughly, maybe a little bit more than 0.5. And then I'm going to add in a filter blur. And this time, instead of going 500 by 500, I think we're going to do 300 by 300. And then let's actually bring the width down a little bit. And I'll bring the height down a little bit. Okay, that works. So once we have that, we need to mix that into our chain, right? Mix it into our tree. So we're going to add another color mix node. Drag that into the second slot here. Connect that up to the viewer. And set this to multiply, I believe. There we go. Okay, so you can see that it's in there. It's way too strong, but that's a vignette. But we're going to bring this way down to like 0.2. Okay, so now it's subtle. And we can hit M to disable it, see it without and with. It's subtle, but it draws your eye into the scene, which is very good. All right. So we've got our vignette, and those are kind of the main parts. Let's maybe bring this up a little bit. Let's go 0.24. Also just double check. Yeah, I had it on multiply. All right. So we've got that. Let's do a little bit more just kind of general tone mapping. Let's add in a new frame. So Shift A, layout frame. This up here. I'll put our nodes in there, and we'll name this frame vignette. Okay, so there's our vignette frame. You can also color these frames, by the way. So if we enable color, we can set whatever color we want, just to help visually organize it. But I'm going to disable that for now. Okay. So like I said, we can also do some just general color correction on the image. Move this down there. So I'm going to do this before I do the gradient overlay. So let me move those over. So this is going to be after it has the background. Actually, no, I'm going to even do this before the background. This is going to be like one of the first things that I do. Okay. So I don't want this to affect the gradient overlay, so I want to make sure I do it in the chain before the gradient overlay gets added. Let's add in a color balance. I'll just drop that right there. And then we can use this node to affect the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. We can change the color. We can change the kind of brightness of them. We can also change this to offset power slope if you prefer. But let's say we want the shadows to be a little bit more on the blue side. See, that's really, really strong. It doesn't take much. We can kind of push that a little bit towards blue, maybe a little bit darker. That's too dark. We can also bring the factor down. It's going to essentially give us finer tune control over this. Okay. So it subtly got a little bit darker. We take the highlights here and just push the highlights up a little bit, essentially increasing the contrast. We can maybe push them. Maybe push the highlights a little bit towards. Maybe towards magenta a little bit. Let's maybe push the midtones a little bit towards blue. So really subtle effects. You don't want to go too far. Like, you don't want to just wash everything blue. These are meant to be subtle corrections. Okay, let's Alt-V and zoom in on this. We just kind of move things out of the way there, so we can see what we're working with. Okay. Now I think overall I probably went a little bit too far on this gradient. So let's zoom in here to our gradient and make some changes. See, okay, so here's what our mask looks like. And here's our gradient blur. Yeah, you can see that we're getting a whole lot more purple on this than we are blue. So let's shift this position over. Okay. Then we'll Control Shift click at the end of our chain, see how it's looking. Okay, that's looking better. I'm going to take this teal color and just darken it a little bit too. Actually, instead of doing that, let me undo that. I'm just going to add one more node to this chain. I can add a color, and we can keep it simple and do a brightness contrast. And we can just bring the brightness of it down a little bit. See how far we need to go. There, maybe something like that. And we'll click back on multiply so we can see the finished result. Okay, so here's before and after. Okay. I think overall it just might be too much magenta in it. So let's see what else we can do about that. And that's really what this process is. There's not much else to it. You can add masks and kind of, if some areas are a little bit too bright, you can darken those. If I zoom out here on the background a little bit, kind of just objectively look at this, maybe on my vignette, Maybe we want to bring that factor up a little bit. Maybe we go to like 0.4 on the vignette. That actually definitely feels better. Maybe this side is a little bit too bright, so we could add in another matte and just darken this area a little bit. We can lighten some other areas that we want. Kind of whatever we feel the need to do. I'm just going to grab this color in itself. Bring that saturation down a little bit. I'm also going to bring the value down a little bit. It's just doing a little too much. Okay. And the other thing is I'm going to re-look at this alpha over. And if we bring that factor all the way down, it's all the way up. Okay. I don't think we want to do any. Oh, there we go. Invert Pre-Multiply. So let's look at what that specifically says. Convert Pre-Multiply. Converts foreground image to pre-multiplied alpha format. The alpha over node is designed to work with pre-multiplied alpha color format. Use color pre-multiplier when you know that your image has straight alpha color values to perform the correct over operation. Result will still be pre-multiplied alpha. Okay, that is the magic checkbox that I was looking for. That's why everything was looking super strong and weird. So I'm going to mute this brightness contrast node in my gradient overlay. I'm also going to jump back into Photoshop real quick. And let me grab this bright color again. Copy that. Okay. Back over to Blender. Make that the bright one again. Okay. Got that in there. Let me also mute the color balance a little bit. Let's bring that vignette back down to 0.2. Okay. That's much better. So without this alpha over, without checking convert pre-multiply, the kind of the haze and the fog just wasn't getting factored in correctly, and it was making everything much brighter than it needed to be, or than it should have been. So with that enabled, we're getting much closer to what we were looking for. We can go back to our background as well, and I'm going to pull that back a little bit. I want to see a little bit more of that gradient there. Okay. So there we go. There's a much better looking finished image. Okay. I'll do one last little thing here. And like I said, you can use masks and mixing and combining things to really get more detail here. But what I'm going to do is add in. I downloaded this already. I just did a Google search for film grain, and we'll see it here in a second. I just got to navigate to my textures folder. Okay, so here's what the film grain looks like, and this is film grain from Kodak Vision 2 film stock. It's a very specific film grain. If you're not into filmmaking, then this might not mean nearly as much to you as it does to me. But here's what it looks like if you zoom way in. Now, I want to say, first of all, film grain is not the same as render noise. Film grain is often added to make composites look better, especially when you're merging with live action footage. But it also kind of gives a depth and a bit of a realism to a render. Whereas if everything is super like glossy smooth, something feels off. So I'm going to drag in my film grain here. And I'm going to add in another color mix node. Oops, not invert. Color mix is the one I'm going for. I'm going to drag this here into the output. And we will drag, we'll zoom in here so we can see it. And I'm going to drag the image into the other slot. And we're going to set this to overlay. Okay. And then scale on this seems a little bit off. So let's zoom in here a little bit. I think the scale is off because I believe this is a 4K image. Yes, it is. It's actually a 6,000 by 4,000 image, so we need to scale this a little bit. So let's add in a, let's see, I remember where it is. We want to distort scale. There it is. And let's go 5 and 5. Nope, that's the wrong way. Let's go 0.25, 0.25. That's better. That's more like film grain. Okay. Whoops. Didn't want to add that. Just want to zoom in here. Okay, so now we can get a sense of what that film grain is. And as comparison, I'm going to jump over to a reference image that is kind of my main motivation for adding this film grain. And that's from Blade Runner. Go. Okay. So again, I'm using Shot Deck because Shot Deck is fantastic. So let's find a nice kind of, see, there's a lot of blue in this. Here's a nice outdoor street scene. And we'll hit Control plus a few times to zoom in. You get a sense of that grain. Now this is actually really good quality. There's not a whole lot of grain that's apparent. So let's do a similar thing here. In the overlay node, which is where we're combining our film grain, I'm just going to bring that factor down. Something like that. Let me refer to my Photoshop reference. And if nothing else, the fact that I keep going back to Photoshop should tell you that you can really get these same effects in both programs. Set this back to overlay. Actually, I think that was overlay. Okay, so this was at overlay and 50%. So somewhere right around there looks pretty good. Whoops. Undo that. I hit the wrong button. I want to zoom out. V, middle click and drag. Okay. Oh, and it looks like, so when I scale down my background image, I scaled it too far, and you can see the edges of it. So let's scale this up a little bit. Let's go 0.4. Should be enough. Yes, okay, that's enough. That scales it nicely. Okay. So I'm pretty happy with that. So you could do, you want to do kind of a really broad stroke color correct after the fact, you could do that. So let's say you wanted to do like a hue correct. This would affect, because this is at the end of the chain, this is going to affect everything. Let's say we just wanted to maybe push the saturation of all of the blues. You could do that. Okay. Maybe we want to desaturate this red a little bit. I could take the red and I could pull that down. I'm not going to get too much into the nitty-gritty of color grading. But you can kind of push and pull your image around a bit and get the results that you're really going for? I'm going to Control X and delete that and maintain the links. Oh, there is one other thing. I know I keep saying there's one more thing, but this might actually be the one last thing. And that's going to be maybe adding a little bit of glare. So I want to add this. Let's go before the gradient overlay. And after the background, maybe? You can always move it around later if you want. We're going to add Shift-A, add a filter and glare. I'm going to drop it in right here. Again, this is... Here's my background. So it's after I added the background in, but it's before I added in the gradient overlay. Okay, and then so let's zoom in here, and I think this might be our best chance of really seeing the effects of this. I'm going to change this from streaks to fog glow. And I'm going to set the quality to high. And it's going to take a second update. Not getting a whole lot of effect. I was curious about this because we already have the volumetrics. So this might not actually... Oh, we got to bring the threshold down. That's right. Let's bring the threshold down to 0.4. And it'll take a second update. There we go. Okay, so now we're just getting a little bit of kind of localized hazy glow around all of our lights. Bring this down even more. Let's go 0.2. Okay, there we go. So we get kind of almost a washed out sort of thing. I might have been too far. Let's go 0.3. It's better. And Alt V. No, V. I guess I'd always forget which one's which. Yeah, so that can just be a little extra touch there. Let's just move all of that out of the way. And I think I'm going to call that good for this image. I'm going to do just a quick look at taking this and applying it to another image. But for now, that's a good image. So let's hit F12 to render this. And it's going to take a second to initialize. There it goes. That's the nice thing about rendering composites is it took 4 seconds instead of 4 minutes or 4 hours. Then we can save this as... and I can save this as a JPEG because I don't need to worry about transparency. I'll set the quality to 100%. I will navigate to my renders folder. Actually, I'm going to create a new folder. I'll call this output. Okay. And this we will call Cyberpunk Street Wide Composite, comp for composite. And then I'm going to add in a 01. I never like to use final in file names because invariably you'll end up creating another version or tweaking it further, and then you're going to end up with like final 2 or something like that. So don't worry about adding final. Just incrementally save and number your file names, and you'll be much better for it. Okay. So I save that. I'm going to disable the backdrop for a second so we can just look at our node tree. I'm also going to quickly add in a frame here. And we're going to call this film grain. Well, there's actually one more thing that I wanted to add that I just remembered. See, this is why we don't call things final. Okay, so here's my film grain. And here's my vignette. So maybe this film grain will give it a color, make it a little bit lighter. We can go something like white. And then here's our gradient overlay. So we'll give this a color, make it kind of a magenta sort of thing. Okay. And then here's our background. So we can give this a color, and we'll go with like that darker teal sort of thing. Okay, so that's going to help certainly make sense of our scenes in a much clearer way. Okay, so, oh, we also don't need this color balance node anymore, so I'm going to hit Control X to remove that. Okay, so let's do a quick, that last thing that I wanted to add. And that's going to happen, let's see, I think where the best place to do this is going to be. Oh, let's also save our file. I haven't saved it all. Shame on me. There we go. Okay. Definitely want to save. So let's put this last little thing. I'm going to put this right before the film grain. I'll select these nodes. I'll move those over. Move that over. Zoom out, push that down into the corner. Okay. So I'm going to add in a distort and lens distortion node. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to affect the dispersion. And this is going to create some chromatic aberration. Chromatic aberration is it's a property of lenses. And what that does, let me pull up a reference image. You can kind of see this. Okay, so chromatic aberration, this is how you spell it if you're curious. Chromatic aberration is a property of lenses whereby different wavelengths of light bend at different angles, different degrees as it passes through the lens elements. And that's the actual physical reason why this happens. What it actually looks like is you'll see, especially in areas of very high contrast, you'll see either like purple or sometimes green fringing on things. And that's what that's doing. The more expensive the lens that you have, generally, the less prominent that is. This is a very extreme example. But I mention this because this is the type of thing that can add some additional realism to your renders. If we zoom in here on this, you'll see that we've got this kind of purple fringing down here around these leaves. Okay, so that's what we're going to add now. Please, please, please use this very, very subtly. If I set this dispersion to 0.1, we'll take a second to update. There we go. This is very extreme. Okay, that's way too much. Let me also zoom in somewhere where this is going to be more noticeable, I think. Oops, Alt-V, Alt middle mouse button. Oops. There we go. All right, so we'll focus on this area of the render. So you see that's way too much. Even 0.1 is way too much. We do have some other options here. We've got, let's see, projector. We've got jitter. We have fit for positive distortion factor only. No, okay. So we're just going to worry about dispersion. And I'm going to set this to 0.03 because it's a good number. I like that number. I'll let this update. Take a second. There we go. Okay, so that's much more subtle. We can even go probably 0.02. Okay, that's better. Let's hit V. Okay. Like I said, it's a very subtle effect. Even that, you could argue is maybe a little too much to go 0.016. Yeah, it's going to take a second to update, and there we go. All right, so we'll leave it there for that. We'll turn off backdrop, and you can see me maximize this view, and I'll hit N so we can kind of see the whole thing. It's kind of a once-over. I've got my image. I've got my background that I made. I'm alpha overing with Invert Pre-Multiply. That's important. I added a glare to give a little bit of extra glow to my lights. I'm combining it with a gradient overlay just to generally tone map the whole thing. I don't need this node, so let's hit Control X on that. Okay. I'm then adding in a vignette just to darken the edges and draw the eye into the scene. Add a lens distortion for chromatic aberration. And then mixing in some film grain over the top, again for a little bit of extra realism. And then I've got my output. So let's save this again. I'm going to hit render. It'll take another 4 seconds to render, or 3 seconds this time, even better. Then we will image save as, and again, this is why we don't put final in the file names. Just hit 2, save as image. Okay, that image is done. Now I want to add in, or bring in one more image, and we'll just do this on one of the close-ups. So you can see how we can kind of take all this work and not have to repeat everything. Now we're going to have to make some changes, but yeah, you'll see that here in a second. So let me find my other image. And again, I'm just clicking and dragging this in. So let me go scroll up, and I want camera 2. Bring that in. And we can turn on backdrop. Again, this is only going to show what's connected to the viewer, so I'm going to Control-Shift-Click on this. Here's camera 2. And let's just select everything here, except for the viewer nodes. And I'm going to hit Shift-D to duplicate it, and I'm just going to move it way down. So we can kind of zoom out here and turn off the backdrop for a second. I'm just going to move it down. Okay. And I'm going to take these 2 viewer nodes and move those down here as well. And our image, so we can get rid of this node. We'll connect this up in here. And Control-Shift-Click on that. And connect our overlays here. Okay, so we just duplicated the whole tree and then brought the viewer and the composite nodes down because we only need one of each of those. All right. So now we can just focus on this, go to our backdrop, and there's our backdrop with everything automatically applied, which is pretty cool. Now from here, what we can do is make any changes that we see fit. So the background, we don't actually need because we don't see the background here at all. So we can just get rid of that. We can keep this nice and simple, or try to keep it more simple. You can also get rid of this alpha over node, again, because we don't have that background in there, so I'm going to hit Control-X on that. Bring this in. Okay, so that's good. There's our glare. Maybe we'll bring this glare threshold down even more, make this more apparent. Let's go back to 0.2. Okay, see, I don't like some of the distortion we're getting back here, so we won't do that. Maybe increase the size. Oh, we can also increase the mix. So if we want to see just the end result of this, we can crank that up to 1. There's the end result. So let's increase this size. Oh, 9 is, I think, the highest it'll go. Okay, but that's what that gets us. Then we can go back to 0 on the mix, and that's going to be an even mix of those two things. We want to see the before and after. You can hover over this and hit M to mute that node. There's the before, and there's the after right there. And again, it's just a nice little extra bit. All right, we've got our gradient overlay, which actually just go to here. Maybe we want to bring a little bit more purple in on the side, so we can adjust our position. Oops, we're going in the wrong way. Okay, that's going to bring the purple in a little bit further. We can adjust the rotation. If maybe we want this to be perfectly straight, we can do that. Let's look at our final output again. All right. Our film grain is good. Our chromatic aberration is pretty good. We can maybe bring the dispersion up to 0.02, just kind of see what that looks like. Yeah, I mean, that's maybe a little bit much. 0.018. Subtlety is definitely key here. Let's see, our vignette. I'm pretty happy with the vignette. I think generally I just want to do a little bit of contrast in here. So I'm going to add this between or before my lens distortion and after I add in my vignette. No, I'm going to do this before the vignette. Yeah. We'll do this between the gradient overlay and the vignette. Zoom out here a little bit. I will move that up and move this down. And hit Shift A, add in a color and curves, RGB curves, right in there. And then just a really simple kind of contrast adjustment. I'm going to add a point down there, bring that down. And I can add a point up here and bring this up. It's really subtle, but if we get a little bit of an S, that's going to increase the contrast. Maybe I'll bring it down a little bit. Okay, yeah, I think I like that. I think I like the how extreme that is. Yeah. I don't think there's really anything else that I want to do there. So I'm going to hit F12 again. It's going to render that. Okay. And we will image save as. This is going to be, let's call this cam2 composite 01. Save as image. Oh, also set this to JPEG and 100% quality. All right, so that's it. That's compositing in Blender. You can certainly get a lot more complicated than this, but you don't have to. And using these layout tools will also help you stay sane as your node trees grow. And just remember that things get applied from left to right. And play around with it and have fun. And good luck. Yeah, so that's it for the project. I hope you've ended up with something that you've enjoyed and that you're proud of. This project overall, I have to say there's a lot more that I would like to do personally, but we have to move on in the semester and get to a little bit of animation. Just kind of as a general thing, additional things that you can add. Obviously, you can build this out so that it's not just a flat wall and a single planes. You can add more environment, adding more grunge, adding more just little detail bits, more cables, just more. Certainly more graffiti would be good, but I think this shows a variety of things that you can kind of apply to much larger and more involved scenes. So that's it, and we will rejoin next week, changing gears completely, for some animation.